Greg Anthony here, and thanks for coming back on the Investigative Journal on this February 15th, 2017 day on our calendar. And my guest today is Deborah Ondrisek of the Alamo Ministry, and we're going to get into the case of Tony Alamo and how the ministry has been persecuted for over 40 years. But before I do that, let me give you my Jesuit quotes of the day. And a little introduction on what's really going on, what the Jesuits have up their sleeve for America. But anyway, Hector McPherson, he was the author of the book, The Jesuits in History, stated this. He said, "They, the Jesuits, have so constantly mixed themselves up in court and state intrigues that they must in justice be reproached with striving after world dominion. They cost kings their lives, not on the scaffold, but by assassination, and equally hurtful as the Society of the Illuminati. They were foremost among the crowd at all events who applauded the murder scenes in Paris during the French Revolution." And I thought since Prime Minister Netanyahu at this very moment is meeting with President Trump, I thought I would give you a quote by Bill Hughes from his book, The Enemy Unmasked. And I said on many of my shows, I said, if you look at what they're doing in front of us right now, if you're looking at the world stage, and it is a stage, if you're looking at politics as you're given from the mainstream and alternative media, you're going to get only the story they want out there. Now, the alternative media, I have no use for it really anymore, to be honest with you, because it is just full of a lot of nonsense that never gets to the heart of the problem. Well, Bill Hughes did get to the heart of the problem in this quote from a book he wrote called The Enemy Unmasked, and it's quite appropriate when we start talking about the meeting between Netanyahu and Trump as we speak. Let me give you the quote and then a little bit of my analysis. "Why would the Jesuits," he says, "use their implacable enemy, the Jews, to further their designs for world dominion? The Jesuits never do anything out in the open where they can be exposed. If they are recognized as the culprits, they will be blamed and suffer the consequences. But if they can use someone else as the cause of the world problems, especially an enemy they can destroy in the process, they have simultaneously accomplished two of their objectives. The Jewish people are the perfect scapegoat. Since the Rothschilds are Jesuit agents operating under a Jewish cover, and I call them, folks, they're basically the Jewish papal court Jews working for Rome, and that includes the Knesset, includes the United States Senate and Congress, and basically what's happening is the Jesuits operating under a Jewish cover, using them, informing the Illuminati way back during the time of our revolution, effectively throwing all of the problems onto the Jews. The Rothschilds are certainly not the only Jesuit agents that operate under a Jewish front. Okay, so like I said, if you just look at what they're showing us right now, they're going to do a press conference and all of this stuff, you're only getting part of the picture. You got to go behind the scenes and ask yourself this question. What do the Jesuits have up their sleeve right now? And let me do this quickly. If you go to the alternative media, I have been castigated many times for telling the truth about Jesuit history and intrigue. And way back when I started this over a decade ago, the radio stations I worked on used to bring on people that would call me crazy and say it's the Jews that are the problem. They even went to extent of really destroying my character by saying I was a Jewish Mossad agent, that I was controlled, and I was a mind-controlled MK Ultra victim being controlled by the United States military, and so the lies went on. Now, when I saw that, I realized I was on the right track. So what do they have up their sleeves now? And before I get to my guest, Deborah Ondrisek, who knows quite well about all of this stuff because their ministry has been the target of the Jesuits for years. But let me say this. Here's what they have up their sleeves, and let me do it really quickly. In every aspect of our world right now, let's start out with foreign affairs. The world right now is basically dividing itself up into two different fronts. And I believe for a conflict. You can look at the West fighting the East, and then you have all of the components, and the countries are lining up right now for a huge conflict. So we have that going on in our foreign affairs. You don't have to look very far to see what's happening in North Korea. Russia now has a ship about 30 miles off the coast of Connecticut. Things are going on to create this conflict. All we need is a powder keg moment, like 9/11 or like Pearl Harbor. Okay, now let's look at our government. Never before have I seen what's happening in our government itself. National security conversations are being leaked by intelligence officers still beholden to Obama. It's similar to what goes on in a banana republic. Recently, the NSA head Michael Flynn was let go by Trump, and for those very reasons that there was leaked information that he said some things to the ambassador of Russia prior to him taking over for Obama. So we have a huge problem there. And what that is meant to do is divide the government, a Hegelian dialectic. Now, look at the people, us, the extras in this big movie. And that's what we are. We're watching a movie unfold, and we're never getting to the bottom of what's really going on, the reality of it. Here's what they want you to believe. We have now, I've never seen people so divided in our country. If you are a Republican right now, you go to do a rally or speak, you're going to be basically met by a group of thugs that are being paid for by the very president that just got out of office. Never have I seen anything like it. Obama is behind, and you can go to his website. You can see articles coming out now. Obama is behind all of these riots and these protests going on against anybody who says they're behind Donald Trump. So you're seeing the Hegelian dialectic play out right before your very eyes. That's what they want you to believe. A divided country, a divided people, a divided world, all set up for who? All set up for the real king, the Pope of Rome, to come in on a white horse and say, listen, stop it all. We will save you. The world needs to be at peace. When he says peace, he means war. And with that, let me get to my guest, Deborah Ondrisek. Deborah, you've known about this cover that the Jesuits have done for years, and you have been involved in a ministry that's tried to help people not only to read the Bible and understand things. All this is laid out in the Bible, by the way. But you've seen persecution at the highest levels come down from our government to destroy. What you guys were doing was a simple ministry, trying to spread the word of God, but also not forgetting that we live in a world today that is controlled by the very people that I talk about every day on this show, that your pastor Tony Alamo talked about every day, and that are the Jesuits and the Vatican getting inside of our government to basically form a one world order, one world religion as we speak, and it's happening. Tony wasn't afraid to talk about it, and because he did, they came up with false charges to put him in jail for 175 years. They not only did that, but they basically kidnapped your children, took them away, and then they're now trying to take all of your property. So in a nutshell, just give us an overview of what I just said and put it into perspective about what's happening to our country. And then I know you have a letter you want to read to help Tony's case, and we'll get to that in a minute, but just your reaction on what I said.
Well, that's certainly true, Greg, everything you said regarding the Jesuits and their agenda and the leader, the king, the Pope. He's known as a sovereign, as the king of the Vatican. That's a sovereign country. And we have been exposing for many, many years what's been going on in our government. And they'll do the Hegelian dialectic. They'll play both sides, like the Republican Party, the Democrats. They'll use whatever they can to bring forth this one world government. The goal is to have a one world government. And with one person in charge and all these other underlings under them that are under their control by whatever means they have to control them. And that is exactly what's coming forward. But from the spiritual aspect of it, the Bible tells us that we either serve God or we serve Satan. So it always goes back to that choice between God and Satan. And if you look at the world, you're not going to see Jesus walking around where you can just go up, but you see him in his people and everything that the Lord and the Bible stands for. The many, many years. And we believe in the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, all aspects of it. And we've been preaching that for many years. Our pastor has given us a lot of insight into his word. And really, the things that you find, believe it or not, the things that we discuss and talk about, they really are in the Bible. You'll find them somewhere in the Bible. A lot of it, some of it's in the book of Daniel and different books in the Old Testament. A lot of it is in the New Testament, in the Gospels, the discourse that Jesus had in Matthew 24 and Luke 21, where it's recorded about the last days, what would happen, and also in the book of Revelation, and then also in some of the epistles by the Apostle Paul, where he talks about the Antichrist. Only he doesn't use the word Antichrist, but John, who wrote the first, second, and third epistle of John and the Revelation, he does mention Antichrist. And that's what we're up against. The people of God, the people of Christ, against the people of Satan, the Antichrist, Satan's world church and government. So what you're saying is true. They use different means. They'll use, say, the Rothschilds. They'll use whoever. All the different secret societies, they will use. They incorporate it into the great deception, because the Bible says that the whole world is going to be deceived. And everyone is going to be deceived into taking a mark in their right hand or their forehead. That's Bible. That's what we teach. That's where it's headed right now. And the amazing thing is, it's Bible prophecy being fulfilled right before our very eyes. If you do the research on what they're doing and where it's headed, it's amazing.
Okay, listen, I want to get to this so we have time. We got maybe 10 minutes on this side of the break and then the whole second half hour. But if anybody's been listening to my show for the last 10 years, and especially in the last year, you'll know that there's a website I started called freetonyalamo.com, which leads you to a petition that we now have online that I'm going to use as an aid to try to get Tony out of prison. He's been there for almost a decade for crimes he hasn't committed. And if you've listened to my shows, you've heard all the evidence that, to me, shows completely that this was a setup, a frame job, and he doesn't deserve to be there. And so go to freetonyalamo.com. You can read about that. And I thought what we could do right now, you have information. Explain how they framed him in a sense. There were 4 or 5 girls that testified against him, and they used the Mann Act to do that, which means they didn't need specific evidence of any child abuse or sexual abuse. And I know you have a letter, and just give us a lead into what this is all about. And I want you to read that 5-page letter, which I believe will help people understand that Tony's innocent. Go ahead.
One of the 5 girls that accused Tony, her mother wrote this letter, and it tells exactly the state of her daughter before and after the government got a hold of her, what she was like and how they could use her. And the government got a hold of several of the children that were in the ministries, people who had no intentions whatsoever of bringing any accusations or charges against the ministry. And they bought these young people with gifts and trips going here and there to different places on cruises, on ships, and different things that they would do and give them to try to buy their loyalty to them, to turn them against the ministry. And one of the girls, Jennifer Colbeck's daughter, Desiree, she, even to this day, receives a large check from the government every month. And so she's supported by the government for her false testimony against our pastor. And I have a letter here that her mother wrote to President Donald Trump. And that's what I'd like to read. This will help explain it a little bit more, at least from the perspective of one of the girls that they used.
And I will also include this in the petition that we're going to get to the pardon attorney of Trump to see if we can get Tony's sentence commuted. So go ahead.
Okay, this is it. Dear Mr. President Donald Trump, American citizens, and anyone who stands for justice, I will first introduce myself. My name is Jennifer Colbeck. I'm writing this letter because there is an innocent man dying in prison, and if I don't do everything in my power to make you understand the diabolical scheme that has taken place, I could not live with myself. I have done a lot of traveling recently, and I have met a lot of good people who genuinely despise injustices. So hear my story, and please help me right the wrongs that have been done. The government will stop at nothing to silence the person that is unafraid to speak out. No one is forced to give their life to God, but we as Christians are commanded to take the gospel to the four corners of the earth. Pastor Tony Alamo's ministry sends out gospel literature, Bibles, and aid free of charge all over the world. This is the same man who has been framed and is innocent and is sitting in prison right now. As a mother, what could be worse than having a child that is a sociopathic liar and has a severe lack of empathy? I will tell you what is worse. It is watching that child destroy innocent lives. I watched in horror as my daughter's theatrical lies caused beautiful families to be torn apart. Children who adored their parents and were so happy were ripped from their families. Then to hear my daughter say, "I'm sorry, I didn't know they were going to do that," but quickly and uncaringly add that if the parents just leave the church, they can get them back. I had to watch while Pastor Tony, who has done nothing but good, was arrested and sentenced to 175 years in prison. Why? My daughter was threatened, promised money, and position. It isn't enough that the government has taken the Bible out of schools and out of the courtrooms. My daughter was raised being taught the Bible, and the U.S. government paid for her to be sent to a place where they do what they call deprogramming. She was sent to a place called the Cult Awareness Network, now called Wellspring Retreat, where they use coercive measures to force a person to change their beliefs and abandon their allegiance to God. They constantly barrage the mind with fabricated stories, teaching them as truth till their victim believes them as truth. Then they teach their victims how to tell these lying stories in a very convincing manner. As Joseph Goebbels said, if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. Desiree needed to be programmed to witness against Pastor Alamo at his trial and tell the stories they wanted her to tell so convincingly. As a result of this conspiracy, an innocent man sits in prison, and my daughter, Desiree, receives a large check every single month to where she does not have to work. She is now completely anti-God and has married another woman, but proclaims she is not a lesbian. She says she is married to a man that is trapped in a woman's body. She is a witch and conjures up demons along with the drugs she takes. Why didn't I do anything about it before? I have done everything I know to do. Even under threat of having my other children taken away, I went to Tony Alamo's trial to testify of these things. The prosecuting attorneys would not let Desiree see me because they knew how unbalanced their key witness was. When I got on the stand, after just a couple of questions, they asked me where my other children were. I would not give any other children up to this government scheme. I pled the fifth, and as a result, the judge would not allow me to testify any longer on Tony Alamo's behalf and struck my testimony. The prosecution knew that was exactly what I would do to protect my other children, and that would be the only way to shut me up. The same silencing tactic was used against the mother of another programmed complaining witness. I cannot stand by and see this go on any longer. Tony Alamo is innocent and is in prison as a political prisoner. Hear my story, and you tell me if the word of Desiree Kolbeck should be used to convict anyone of even the smallest of crimes. I have 5 children whom I love dearly. I raised all my children in the Tony Alamo Christian Ministries. They all had very good upbringings. They were all raised happy and lacking nothing. My oldest daughter, Desiree Kolbeck, born May 27, 1991, in Madera Beach, Florida, was raised most of her life in Arkansas. Desiree was babysat as a young toddler by some friends in Fort Smith, Arkansas, who had 2 teenage boys. Desiree started doing very strange things to her baby brother, and we couldn't figure out where she was getting these things from. Finally, Desiree showed me what one of the boys was doing to her. We were outraged, but could not prove it, so we kept Desiree with us every day in hopes she would forget what was done. I believe that this horrible crime done to her is the reason she has become a sociopathic, pathological liar with strange sexual fantasies. Since that time, Desiree has had countless incidents in school and among her friends where she would lie for no reason. She always wanted all attention on her. When she was young, she faked her neck being broken and was so convincing that even the doctors had her driven by ambulance to the hospital. Only after actually taking the x-rays did the doctor come to us with a neck brace and tell us, "There is nothing wrong with your daughter. She is doing all this for attention. We will put this neck brace on her, but she does not need it." Sure enough, when no one was looking, she moved her neck freely. Only when someone looked did she react. We went home and she got tired of wearing the brace, so she took it off. As soon as we had a knock at the door, she ran to put the neck brace on and started groaning. When Desiree was 8 years old, I was driving home from church at around 9:30 in the evening. My youngest daughter, who was 3 years old, was in the vehicle with us. I broke down in the middle of a four-way intersection. A police car with its strobing lights pulled up, and the officer came to see if we needed help. We were directly in the middle of the intersection, and we could not move the vehicle. I asked the officer to use his phone to call my husband to ask him to come get me. The officer offered to drive us home, but I did not get into vehicles with people I do not know. For sure, not some man, and for sure, not at night, especially with my children, and no one knowing where I was, badge or not. I told the officer that would not be necessary if I could call my husband, who wasn't far away, and he would come get us. The officer said I could use his phone.
Deborah, hold that thought, and we'll pick up right where you left off. We have to take a hard break right now, so we'll come back in 3 minutes with Deborah Ondrisek. She's reading a letter by a mother of one of the girls that testified against Tony Alamo, and we'll get to the bottom of it. This is a recent letter sent to Donald Trump, and we'll get to the bottom of what's going on in the second half hour. So stay right there, and we'll be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal, and my guest is Deborah Ondrisek of the Alamo Ministry. We're in the middle of a letter that is written by one of the mothers regarding how her daughter framed Tony Alamo and was coerced by the government. And we've talked about the number of girls. There's 4 girls, I believe, that testified against him, and they were all selected. None of them went forward to the FBI. And let me just give you an overview here real quickly. Because of this travesty of justice that I've been talking about for over a decade, and seriously now for the last year, trying to gain support for people to listen to this case, because the mainstream media has depicted Tony as a child abuser. It's false. They've depicted this ministry as a cult, which is false. And I've tried to show that. And so if you just go to the mainstream media, you're going to get a very untrue version of what's really going on at this ministry. So if you go to freetonyalamo.com, go to the top, it says sign the petition. You can press on that and go to the petition site. Many people have so far over the last few months, and because of this, I said Tony Alamo and his ministry have been targeted for more than 40 years by the U.S. government. Deborah, my guest, knows that. She's been there for the whole time, and we've done many shows with her to explain this to you. They were targeted by the FBI, the BATF, CIA, and IRS, and I said the reason is because they talk the truth about the Bible, which the Vatican does not want you to go to, because they've been doing this ever since the Protestant Reformation, and nothing's different today. And then when this ministry decided and has shown people all over the world Jesuit intrigue throughout the world and our government, boy, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. So basically, they've hired the FBI. We have informants that have come forward with sworn affidavits stating they were hired to frame Tony. What more do you need? But they weren't allowed to testify at the trial. So here we go. Tony's been framed for his biblical and political views. The sworn testimony of one of the government agents was not allowed in the 2008 criminal trial for violations of the Mann Act. And if you look closely at this trial and the appeal documents, it indicates a miscarriage of justice of the worst degree. Recently, President Trump said basically our judiciary is out of control. And he even said it regarding a case against him and his immigration policies. So this case shows you they are. Now, Furthermore, the ministry has been falsely depicted as a cult by government officials, and like I said, an orchestrated media campaign of the ruling elite and the Vatican-controlled powers in our government. And if you don't believe me, you just start checking out who worked for Obama, who worked for Bush, who's now still in government. You're going to understand they have deep controls over, and now we got an airplane flying over, so let me wait for that to go. I'm in a flight path here of military helicopters and Navy jets all the time. They fly over the ocean here, and I'm right on the tip of the ocean. But anyway, Tony's already served more than almost a decade of a 175-year sentence. I mean, it's ridiculous, for crimes he didn't commit. He's presently in poor health, legally blind, and needs proper medical care, which he is not receiving in prison, and that's why I'm going to the Trump pardon attorney. And this letter I'd like to include with it, and she already sent that to Trump. So, Deborah, why not continue and go ahead. Tell us where we left off and who wrote the letter. It's just to refresh the listeners' memories. Go ahead.
This letter is written by Jennifer Colbeck, Desiree Colbeck's mother, and Jennifer was in a police car. They were stopped at this intersection. Her car broke down, and Jennifer had just borrowed the telephone from the police officer to call her husband to come get her.
Just one question before you start this letter. Go to the first half hour, folks, to get the first part of the letter. But you've known these girls, right? How do you think they selected these girls?
I knew the girls. I taught them in school, and I think they selected them because some of these girls, I've taught quite a few girls in the ministry schools, and these particular 5 girls had left at different times for one reason or another, and there's no bars on our ministry doors. They can leave any time they want to. And they did leave, and they decided to go out and try the world, get their own lives, do whatever they wanted to do. And while they were out there, they didn't know this, but behind the scenes there was a great campaign going to destroy Pastor Alamo's ministry and to put him in prison because he is one of the few that speak out and get the literature out all over to the different cities about what's going on in the government and what they have done in the past, and showing the Vatican involvement in our government for all the many, many decades, and actually all through the 1900s and going all the way back to where they first started. He's gotten this literature out, and so they had to stop what was going on here. They had to put a halt to our pastor. They put him in prison before on false charges of tax evasion. For 4 years they had him in prison. And so he went out, came out exposing it just as much. He is undaunted. Nobody is going to stop him from what the Lord wants him to put out. And actually, the Bible talks about this one world government, and that's what our pastor was exposing. So that's why this campaign against our pastor. So years before, they had already planned how they were going to do this. So these girls had left the ministry at different times, and they found the girls, they went to them, they offered them money, they offered them all kinds of different gifts, all kinds of trips and this and that and the other thing for false testimony against our pastor. They had it all worked out. All they had to do was get up there, get on the stand, and they had Randall Harris of the FBI, their man, who was sitting there coaching them as they were giving their testimony with a head shake one way or the other, yes or no, to how to answer the questions. So anyway, I'm picking up again.
One thing, though, you did state earlier that Desiree's mother states that Desiree still gets a government check for lying?
Every month, yes.
Wow. Okay, go ahead.
So Jennifer says, I went to the police car parked directly behind us with my 2 girls in the vehicle in front of us. They could clearly see me as I could clearly see them. The area was well lit and there was constant traffic. The officer had a corded phone, and he passed back the phone through the metal barrier that separated the front seat from the back seat where I was. I had to try several different numbers because neither my husband nor neighbors would answer, which caused me to be away from my vehicle for no more than 5 to 7 minutes. We ended up getting help from a neighbor and went home. End of story, you would think. About 6 months later, I was confronted by our pastor, Tony, about a story my daughter Desiree told him about that night. She said that I left my two girls in the vehicle and crawled into the back seat of the police car for 30 minutes and had sex with this cop. And that while I was having sex with this police officer in the police car directly behind my vehicle with its strobing lights going, people were coming to the vehicle directly in front of the cop car where my two girls were, asking them if they needed help. Think about it. What idiot is going to go to a vehicle with an officer right there and ask an 8-year-old girl if they need help? Seriously? I was dumbfounded to hear such a horrendous story that came from my daughter about me. Why or how could such a young child come up with such a story? I never treated Desiree meanly. She was mine. I loved her, and I would do anything to help her. I went out of my way to help her, but I could see as she got older, things were getting worse. Desiree asked her father and I if she could go live with my sister in 2002 when she was 11 years old. My sister lived in Falk, Arkansas, and we would go visit her often. Desiree liked going there, and she seemed like she got the extra attention she wanted, so my husband and I agreed. We were desperate and wanted to help Desiree to be happy and be good. She did good for a little while, but then she started getting in trouble for lying and for not keeping the simple rules in the house. But still in all, she did better there than she did at home. She was happy there, so we would visit her just about every weekend. Something to remember here is that never in all the private times that we spent together visiting and being a family did Desiree ever act unhappy or abused, nor did she ever tell us anything strange or abusive was going on. We were never restricted from visiting, and there were several visits she made back to our home as well. In November of 2006, Desiree ran away because she was in trouble, and her dad and I were coming to see her, and she knew she was going to get a spanking. Desiree was always warned many times before she got spanked, but when that didn't work, she did get spanked. She ran away, leaving a note that she loved living there in Falk, and she loved the pastor, but she didn't want to get spanked. It was heart-wrenching seeing Desiree so mixed up. Desiree went to live with my other sister, Lori, who lives in Cocoa, Florida, and is not part of the ministry. After a few months, Lori said that for the safety of her own children, she had to send Desiree to her grandmother, saying, Desiree is a sociopath. She was sorry she hadn't listened to me before, realizing all the history I had told her about Desiree was absolutely true. But while she lived with Lori, my husband and I talked to Desiree often. Again, never in any of these phone calls did Desiree ever say that she had been abused or touched by anyone. Lori called me one day and said that the FBI had contacted her and wanted to talk to Desiree. No one knew why. Desiree had private meetings with the FBI, and when they were done with her, only then did she start telling these crazy stories. From there, Desiree went to live with my mother and her husband, who also are not part of the ministry, and lived in New Mexico. After a month of keeping her, they agreed with Lori. During the time she lived with them, she began telling outrageous stories that we, her parents, abused her, and that she was abused by Tony Alamo, and that she was being abused by her grandparents. My husband and I were contacted by the Child Protective Services of New Mexico, saying that an investigation was opened regarding Desiree and her accusations against Pastor Alamo, accusations against us, and accusations against my mom and her husband, which were absolutely preposterous.
You know, just to stop you for a minute here, and something just came up. If she told the FBI, well, obviously she's being coerced. And one thing interesting about what you just said was, if she stated that she was abused by her grandmother and grandfather, why weren't they ever charged with anything?
That's right. Obviously, she's a liar, and she is a sociopath, and everybody she ever stayed with came to realize that sooner or later.
Right.
Now,
go ahead.
It says what she called abusive was laying down simple rules and expecting her to obey them. That was abuse. Weeks later, we received a letter from CPS stating that after a thorough investigation, they were closing the case because the stories Desiree told were not sound. In other words, Desiree was lying again. Now, this is a government agency, the CPS, Child Protective Services, who thoroughly investigated and said Desiree was lying.
And that was never brought up in the trial, I imagine.
No, of course not. Of course
So
not.
we have a government agency stating that Desiree was lying about Tony, about what happened at the ministry, about her grandparents, about her mother and father, and this agency said it wasn't credible. But yet the government chose to put Tony in jail for 175 years based on what they said was credible. It's, to me, incredible.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Okay, here we go. Then after a month, Desiree ran away from my mom's house to the neighbor's house down the street, who were total strangers. But they believed the lies and theatrics put on by Desiree and let her live with them. After just a couple months, she was thrown out of their home as well. The conclusion that Tim and Jen Westmeyer came to from the months they tried to help Desiree was that she had a mental condition. When I asked what they meant by this, they said that being a pathological liar is a mental condition. They had to kick her out of their house, remove her belongings, and change the locks on their doors for their safety and their children's safety. She then got a ride from some people and ran away to Oklahoma City. There, she was taken into custody by the state of Oklahoma. We were very concerned, praying that Desiree wasn't going to end up one day in a ditch somewhere. I was in contact with her and spoke to the DHS in Oklahoma City on numerous occasions. I spoke with Desiree, trying to help her and reason with her that she was going the wrong way. The DHS workers said she was uncontrollable and, again, a liar in the worst degree. I want to add that the women who testified falsely against Tony Alamo did not flee the ministry. Rather, they left peaceably. They were living their own lives. The FBI pursued these women, harassed them, and promised them scholarships, careers, and money until they broke. Then they were sent to be deprogrammed and coached on what the government wanted them to say.
Let me state this. This is so interesting to me because people have asked me to back up what I say is regarding calling it a travesty of justice and that Tony didn't get a fair trial. Well, let me bring this up since you just mentioned something that's very important. In the case of Desiree Kolbick, who testified against Tony, it is the job of the defense attorney to impeach the credibility of the witness and to bring in all witness testimony that showed she was lying. And so to me it was incredible that the defense did not call every one of these people and the judge allowing them to testify, and that's including the grandparents and all of the people you mentioned, as well as the CPS government agency's documentation, as well as the testimony of that agent who did that testimony, which would have shown completely to the jury that her testimony was not reliable. That was not allowed. And I'm sure the defense did not do their job regarding the other witnesses, correct?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right about that. That's amazing because they could have brought all these witnesses in. But again, they did not do that. There were no witnesses that they brought in that would, be for the defense against what they were saying.
And with all that evidence, with all of this contradictory evidence on the impeaching the credibility of Desiree, then you bring on top of that the sworn affidavits of an FBI undercover agent who stated the government hired him to bring Tony down. That would have been overwhelming evidence which would have told the jury this case has no bearing to even be in front of us. He would have been exonerated. That's what they held away from the jury. And my goodness, can't anybody see how travesty of justice this was? Go ahead.
Absolutely. That's right. Okay, Jennifer says, proof of this is what predator lets their victims just walk away without threatening them? In court, not one of them ever testified of ever being threatened, not to speak of their alleged abuse, because it never happened. What the government and media is doing is unconstitutional and unlawful. The government, with the help of the media, is manipulating the minds of their audience like young children who watch their animated cartoons and believe them to be real life. Don't allow yourself to be so duped. Having given detailed proof, with witnesses that Tony Alamo is nothing more than a political prisoner, that the government couldn't silence any other way but to use such witnesses paid to speak such lies that would give him 175 years in prison that they believed he wouldn't be able to get out from under. I can't stand back in silence and watch such atrocities as the families that have had their children violently kidnapped from them by our government because they were part of the Tony Alamo Ministries. Families that are living in hiding to protect their children. People whose homes and properties were stolen from them because they were part of the ministry. I'm compelled and obligated to stand up and speak the truth. I pray to God many will make a stand with me. If our government is allowed to take troubled children like Desiree and pay thousands of dollars to send them to a deprogramming facility to train them to speak their words, threaten them and their families, and offer them jobs, presents, parties, and many other gratuities for their false testimonies, and you sit by and watch, then mark my words. It is Tony Alamo today. It is you tomorrow. Free Pastor Alamo. Let him live out his remaining days at home and be cared for by his family. He is innocent and has already suffered going on 9 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Sincerely, Jennifer Colbeck.
Okay, so there's the letter just recently written to Donald Trump, and I hope to include that in all the evidence that we're going to present to the pardon attorney in the months to come to see if we can get the Trump administration to move on this case. Secondly, you knew Desiree. Didn't she even write a letter after the trial that she was sorry she lied?
I believe that she did. As a matter of fact, there were 2 or 3, at least, I would say at least 3 girls that had written letters saying they were sorry that they lied, that they had admitted that they lied, and were sorry about it.
And I know I got one of them or 2 of them off of your website, so go to the Alamo Ministries, that's plural, alamoministries.com, and you can read more about this case. We only have a couple minutes left, but give me your thoughts now on basically just your recollection of the testimony of these 4 or 5 girls in a nutshell, why it was all so orchestrated. You were right there in the trial. Tell us what you witnessed quickly.
Well, I've witnessed that 3 of them for sure have been sent to Wellspring to be deprogrammed, and I know for sure that they were offered gifts, and they probably all get a check from the government to this day. I know Desiree does for sure. And I spoke to her sister, and she confirmed that for sure. And also, I know that these girls, when I taught, I think all of them at one time or another, except for the Orlando girl. I don't believe I ever taught her. But I know that they were liars. They had reputations for being liars. And that what she was saying, what Jennifer was saying about Desiree, you could probably say about just about all of them. And they all had problems that could have been taken care of and ministered to in the ministry, and if they had, they would have let their parents help them, if they would have stayed put, but they wanted to go out. The world is attractive to them, was attractive to them, and they went out to find what they could find, but trouble found them, that's for sure. And they had no idea what would happen, that this would happen, and yet it did. They had no power to fight it, and a lot of people, they'll just give in to anything. If they're offered gifts or money, they'll do anything for money, as you know, and that's what happened in this case.
You know, I said this on a couple of shows, and I'm really not sure, but I either said the defense that Tony had was either in the pocket of the prosecution, or they didn't realize what they were really up against here. And either way, I don't believe he got a fair trial at all. And the appeals were all just rubber stamped by a judiciary that already had made up its mind that they were looking for ways to make sure he was framed, to get him out of the way. I can't see it any other way. We only got about 15 seconds. Your thoughts on that?
I agree with that, and I think that the government went to some of these lawyers, if not all of them, and just told them the plan, and that's what happened there.
Yeah, okay. Well, listen, Deborah, this show's important. Please send it around. If you're listening to this show, folks, send it out to anybody that's listening. And please do that yourself, Deborah, and tell everybody hello at the ministry, and we will continue working, and I'll try to get that petition sent to the pardon attorney in the months to come. Thanks for being on the show. That was Deborah Ondrisek. Good night, and see you tomorrow.